Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. I jumped right in today, but I want to show you guys my fancy intro graphic so that you can see it because I didn't do it. Come on, how fancy is that? Music and everything, little graphic goes by and it ends with my favorite kind of saying for myself: learn in peace. We want our kids to be able to learn in peace. Leave them alone. Let them learn in peace. Let them grow to be who they're actually supposed to be. Let them become what they're actually supposed to become. Help them reach their God-given potential. My guest today is, Educator Zach Wright. Zachary is a finalist for the United States Department of Education's School Ambassador Fellowship. At least that's what our EdPost bio says of him, and is also an assistant professor of practice at Relay Graduate School. Did I know this? I did not know this. Serving in Philadelphia and Camden. Prior to that, he was a 12th grade educator, classroom educator, world literature and AP literature. So the fancy kids, the kids that actually get to AP, which I'm sure you're going to tell me it wasn't the fancy kids. It's garden variety regular students who are fancy kids because they all can learn at a high level. If we believe in them, they can all do AP. Is that right?
Well, what I'm going to tell you is I taught every single senior that the building ever had for 10 years.
Wow.
So I taught the first 8 or 9 graduating classes, and I taught I would say 99% of the senior class, except for the students who were predominantly self-contained classrooms. I taught them all. And AP is a title.
Better watch out. You're gonna get some hate mail.
AP is a title. It's skills. Skills, and when we're teaching literature, we're teaching reading and writing. I don't care where you are, you need those skills. So that's what we did.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today. I did want to talk about this piece that you wrote recently for Education Post. It's important because right now it seems as though, I'm sure to my viewers, I can't get enough of talking about critical race theory right now, not specifically because it's something that I was just interested in and it came about, but because it's becoming the whipping boy. It's a scholarly thought system that is becoming the whipping boy of the conservative right, definitely in the conservative right echo chamber. And it's becoming a catch-all topic and title for everything that they hate about diversity training, race and equity, social justice. They specifically want to challenge it when it gets to schools and in the classroom. You wrote this piece recently. I thought talking about race in the classroom wasn't important. I was wrong. This piece, it starts out right where I'm at. Critical race theory is this moment's scapegoat, a fearful white America. When I write something like this, it probably isn't received the same way because I'm not a member of fearful white America. I'm not even a member of white America. My membership in America is called into question sometimes, especially on Twitter. So it's interesting that a white educator working in urban school environments would be the one to say, I'm going to call the question on this pushback on critical race theory. Tell me what started this with you. Why do you think it's important to talk about, specifically as an educator too, and an educator of literature, what is bothering you about the way that this is being discussed publicly?
Well, I go back and forth with it because I'm unsure if it's actually about critical race theory at all, right? Because it was Sharia law. Remember years ago, it was like Sharia law in schools, and then it was the migrant caravans, and then it was transgenders taking over sports. Right? It's all the same thing. It's just fear of a disruption to the power structure as it is. Right. So whatever the whipping boy, as you say, is of the moment, like that's it, the fear is of the same thing. I think about Isabel Wilkerson's caste. Right. It's fear about the disruption of the caste. When I think about critical race theory myself, and I wrote this in the piece, as I got into education, right, I was an English teacher, right? That's how I started, and that's what I am. But I also began to learn that like you cannot be, and there is no such thing as an apolitical educator. There's no such thing as an apolitical education. You either are aware of the system as it is and are cool with it, or you're aware of the system as it is and you need to work against it, right? Neutrality is not a thing. Neutrality is just in support of the status quo. So as I learned in the classroom and then when I became a father, and I wrote about this in the piece, you start to see things. You start to see things that if you're willing to see them, become absolutely obvious and clear. For me, it came down to the point where I was teaching years and years and years of all of these students who worked so much harder than I did in high school, did so much more than I did in high school, but had so fewer access, such fewer opportunities, such less access because of wealth, because of systemic blocks to access. When you start to look at these things and you realize that these things don't just happen. When Trayvon Martin was murdered, my boys were very young, and I knew then that my boys would never be followed and murdered for being in the wrong development. When Eric Garner was murdered on the street in front of everybody, I knew that my boys would never have to fear me being murdered when I left my house, right? These things are very clear. When I saw my students who did all these amazing things and had, you know, over 4.0 GPAs and incredible internships, not get into school, but not be able to afford anything. And then I know that my boys who haven't done a thing have their college education already budgeted for. Like this is not just, these things don't just happen. These things are designed. Where I think critical race theory, where I think folks get upset with it, is they think that it is an indictment on their personal, on how they are as a person. And that's not what it is, right? It's not what it is. It's larger than an individual. So when I learned about critical race theory and I learned about these systems, it actually liberates me, because I don't have to, I can drop the pretension of perfection, is what I like to say. I can drop the pretension of being an altruistic, totally not racist person. I know that I am complicit. You can't be in this country and not be. You cannot be in this country and not be wrapped up in the systems. I don't have to pretend anymore.
Isn't that the part that makes people mad, though? Like saying that, like, you can't be. I hear people say all the time, critical race theory is dividing people between oppressors and the oppressed, or either one or the other. I think sometimes they're conflating Kendi's work on anti-racism with saying you're either racist or you're anti-racist, one or the other. And I think what they're calling out for, oftentimes when I say they, people who are critics of CRT are saying, I don't have to be one of those other. I get to be just a good person. I just get to be me. I just get to be a good person. I don't have to be one of those two categories. I mean, do you sympathize with that pushback that some people just want to be like a good person?
Yeah, but what I'm laughing at is like, yeah, that's called privilege, right? That's what that sentence is, right? I just want to be me. I just want to, yeah, right. So you want a deracialized existence. That's what you want. You want to just be able to walk around the world and live your life and not have to think about these things. That's called white existence. That's called white privileged existence. So if that's what you want to do, that is your prerogative. You can do that. Just know that you're lying to yourself. Just know that you're blind, right? So I have no problem if someone wants to run their life that way. You do you. What I would like is a little dose of honesty about what you're doing. I would like a little dose about, you know what? I don't care. Just say it. Just say you don't care, and keep it moving. Drop the pretension of you thinking that you're a non-racist person, that you're not involved in the system. Drop all of it. Just own up and say, you know what? I don't care about it. I don't care about that world, and I just want to live my life. You have that prerogative. No one's really going to stop you. Just go do it.
As a matter of fact, some people might support you in saying that. When you say it's not possible to be neutral on questions of race within the classroom, the parent hears, a parent, not a parent listens to that and hears indoctrination. So that means you've decided what's right and wrong in the world, and you're going to teach my kid more than the content, more than the curriculum. There's going to be something extra. You're adding something extra on top. We just want a good education is what they'll say. I mean, how do you respond to the ones who are like, it's kind of like LeBron James with just shut up and dribble. They want to tell the teacher, just shut up and teach the regular story. Regular, as we say in the Midwest, the regular story.
I think two things with that. One, the regular story is a political story, right? Like the regular story is a story that is in support of and perpetuates the system as it is, right? So the regular story is why we have Columbus Day, right? Like that's the regular story, right? So that's not indoctrination. It's just the indoctrination that you're down with. Also, when I teach, and any teacher worth their stripes knows this, the real power in teaching is not telling someone what it is. The real power in teaching is presenting multiple ideas and guiding them through what it is to think about ideas. That's what true education is. So anybody who's afraid of indoctrination, what they're actually afraid of is that they don't think their kid can think for themselves. I can present all of these multiple ideas. In fact, I taught, it was wild. I remember teaching the new Jim Crow alongside the war on cops. And I would teach them side by side. It was opposite perspectives on mass incarceration. My job here is not to tell you what the truth is. My job here is to say, here are two opinions on the truth. Here's how we can read to figure out what biases each author has for you to come up with your truth. That's not indoctrination. That's critical thinking. If you don't think your kid can handle that, what that means is you don't trust your kid to think for themselves, and you really don't trust your kid to not just follow in what you want to believe. True education is not me telling you what is. In fact, kids don't listen to that. Any teacher knows that. If I tell you what the truth is, a real tried and true teenager is going to be like, no, that's not it. Real education and what real quality educators do is they say, here's an example of how we can think about things. That's what real quality educators do. That's what I do and did. That's what it is. If you're afraid of that, then you just really want your status quo untouched, period. I think you're muted, Mr. Stewart.
Oh, sorry about that. I think the example that you just gave is an example that many people on the outside wouldn't know. You're teaching about police officers. If you were someone who was totally against CRT and you're listening to Fox News every day, they wouldn't think that your way of teaching it is teaching opposing sides, like showing, the new Jim Crow and the war on cops next to each other, and creating a situation where people have to think critically between two sets of information, two or more sets of information, which is just critical thinking.
Yeah.
But they're like, we don't like critical theory. We don't like critical. We don't like criticism. We don't like critical race theory. We don't like we just want some uncritical stuff. Like, just teach our kids about America.
Yeah. And what they really would be surprised at is that my classrooms, which were 99% students of color, were split down the middle on which opinion they agreed with. They were split. And that's the power of critical thinking. I had many, I have a student in my office, I won't say his name. I remember he was furious at the Black Lives Matter idea, furious with it. And when we read The War on Cops and the New Jim Crow, he said, the War on Cops is it. How about you just stop making mistakes? I'm not going to correct him. That's not my job. My job is to say, okay, folks on the other side, what text can you cite to disprove? All right, now back to you. What text can you cite to disprove? Like, that's the power of education. And so, like, there's no indoctrination going on. There's just exposure to multiple ideas. And if that scares you, then I don't know what to tell you.
You know, so when you present it this way that you're saying right now, it makes a lot of sense. What is said in the criticism of CRT, what people are saying oftentimes is the things that bother them, or the theoretical underpinnings, for instance, that it's making kids Marxists, that it has a Marxist basis to it, that it's teaching them to hate America, that it's teaching them to hate each other. They've come up with these really, and this is what I figured out about a good portion of America. A good portion of America is stupid. Just let that hang for a second. Just let that sit there. And the reason that I say that is because you can craft clever little slogans that become the reality for people. So I can say Denny's hamburgers are the best in the world, you know, 1,000,000 times, and suddenly people start saying Denny's hamburgers are really pretty good, right? I can say all this is teaching us is teaching kids to hate each other, to hate their country, to be Marxist. It's a socialist plot. And then all of a sudden, that's the only thing that some people know about the theory themselves. They don't go the next step, which tells me a lot about their public school training, because they don't say, oh, well, that sounds terrible. Let me take a look into it, and let me go read the actual theory. Oh, well, I've read the actual theory, and it doesn't seem to be saying that we should all be Marxists. It's saying that if you look at mortgage lending systems and you send in audit testers, and you send in a white family and a black family with the exact same credentials, that they get different loan rates. And there's something wrong about that. And it doesn't just happen in one place. It happens in a system across the country. When you do these audit tests, they come up with the same result. Weird. Now, see, that's different than let's be Marxists, right?
Listen, I don't know what is meant by Marxist, and I don't know if the people who say that know what they mean by Marxist. It's just demagoguery, right? It's just demagoguery. When I think about patriotism, I have a very, very, very healthy fear of patriotism. I think that comes from my Eastern European Jewish heritage. Patriotism is dangerous. When I think about loving my country, I think about loving my children. I love them unconditionally. That is not the same thing as saying that they are perfect. Actually, an expression of love is saying we have work to do. That's what love is, right? When I love my students, that's saying I love you so much, I'm going to give you this challenging work. I love you so much, I am going to hold that expectation. I love you so much, I'm going to push you further than you thought you could. That's what love is. Love is not just an unquestioning, like, everything's good. That's actually lower expectations. That is actually the opposite of love. So when I think about that with patriotism a lot, and it's like, America is like the greatest country in the world. No, it's not. It should be. It should be, but it's not. And if you really love this country, you would actually make it the best, not just say it and keep it moving.
You know, I'm always a little bit interested in people who say they're trying to take away our freedoms. They don't want us to be free Americans. They have "Don't Tread on Me" T-shirts and flags they're walking around with. They're storming the Capitol because they're trying to steal democracy from us. They're trying to, you know, but on the flip side, somehow through 12 years of schooling, sometimes 13 years, sometimes less schooling, they've picked up the, if you don't stand for the flag, if you don't put your hand over the heart, if you don't do performative patriotism, if you don't recite the pledge, if you don't, like, just keep going down the list of the number of things that in their thought system you can't do without them wanting to cancel you. And you start getting to the point where you're like, oh, you're not about freedom at all. Like, you just went to the state capitol and outlawed an entire thought system.
Yeah, it's because, and this is getting back to what I said before, because it's not actually about CRT. Right? It's not. It's not actually about Sharia law in school. It's not actually about supposed transgender students like running up championships now. It's not about any of these things. It's about, I think, I was really moved, again, I'll say it, by Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste. It's about fearing a disruption to the order as it is. It's about fearing any kind of disruption to it. And the thing is, the only thing that I would say is potentially Marxist is that there is opportunity for alignment if this demagoguery goes away, right? There's opportunity for alignment between those who are all getting screwed by the ultra rich, right? There is opportunity there. That's the only thing that's Marxist about it. And that's the actual fear of the 1%. If you really want to get like paranoid about it, but like as soon as those folks realize they could unite, we're done. It's a wrap.
Yeah.
So let's use racial tokening. Let's use racial whistles to keep the separation happening. I mean, this is just the playbook for generations.
Yeah, I mean, Shay's rebellion was a little bit about the fear of the people coming together, right? Like they're going to storm the gates with torches and burn your courthouse down and take your land from you or what? Oh, we can't have that. We're going to have to tell some of them they're better than the others and split them up. We should develop a theory called race. Wow. And then someone comes along and says, we should study your race theory critically. No, we can't do none of that. We can't do that. Do you fear, are there actual consequences as a classroom teacher that these state laws are passing? Is there literally something that you could have done before that you won't be able to do after they pass these laws? Or is it kind of like a bad thing to do, but teachers can still subvert it if they wanted to?
Teachers can always subvert. Teachers can always subvert. Now, that being said, I when I was teaching in high school, my principal was like the biggest subverter of them all, right? So like Sharif El-Mekki. So we were subverting. Now, that being said, I worry because folks have to teach, like in Pennsylvania, for example, like they take the PSSA test, like that is a law, and that while I'm not against testing, like that law does impact classroom teaching. So am I afraid? Yeah, I am a little afraid. I mean, it could just be political posturing that doesn't trickle down into classrooms. But the thing is that political posturing is particularly within these states that's passing them. The first off the mind is Tennessee. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of teachers are like, exactly right. Like, I'm going to roll with that. And I would have rolled with that with whether or not the law was here or not. So yeah, I do fear it because laws do trickle down into the classroom. Teachers always do have the opportunity to subvert and teach their way, but that's a very school to school reality. Whereas if I'm in a school where teachers keep their doors closed and they do what they do and no one checks in, then yeah, I can subvert. But if I'm teaching in the classroom where administration is in my room all the time, then I might not be able to. The funny thing is, though, sometimes the best schools are when the doors are open. I actually would fear a school where teachers keep their doors closed and just do their thing, because I don't think that's positive. I would want admins coming in. I always wanted admins to come, even though in the moment I might be like, yo, I'm just trying to do my thing. It keeps you better. It keeps you better. So I fear it, but the way to fear it, the way I think to combat it is to write an article like I did from the perspective of a white educator and the white parent. This is nothing to be afraid of. Don't fall. Don't fall for it. What I've noticed over the couple of years that I've kind of been writing a little bit is my role, even though this is not the role I intended, my role seems to have been like a white voice to white people of like, here is like, you may not listen to voices of people who don't look like you. You might listen to this voice, which is a completely ridiculous notion. But it's true. But I suppose it's true. I don't know.
You mentioned in your piece for EdPost, and for folks, I'll drop the link into our comments here. You mentioned in the piece that when you looked at your own sons, you did some thinking, some personal thinking and reflecting that impacted how you think about these issues of critical race theory. What was that? What was the dad looking at his kids reflection that you had that changed your mind or made you think differently?
I think the succinct way to put it is that I would look at my two boys, who I love, and they're amazing, as any parent would generally say of their kids, right? And that they sit in and enjoy a world of privilege that they have done shit to earn, and that privilege. And I said this on another show, like, I don't want those privileges to go away. I just want those privileges to be universal. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at them and I see the way they can navigate the world and enjoy the world, and how I don't have to fear for their safety based upon race, and they don't have to fear for my safety based upon race, and the fact that they are enjoying inheritance of wealth from families that were not blocked from purchasing houses in the 30s and 40s, and therefore able to have accumulated wealth, and they're enjoying all these things. Like, they didn't earn any of it, just like I didn't earn any of it, right? And I was born into it. And my father had a phrase whenever he thought my brother and I were getting a little too comfortable. He would say, just because you're born on third doesn't mean you hit a home run. And I think about that a lot. It's like a lot of people think they hit a home run when they were born on third base. Like, you didn't do that. You just walked home. So I think about that with my boys. But when I think about that in two ways. One, it's now part of my job to try to dismantle systems in my own tiny way so that privilege is universal, and to name for my children that they have work to do too, that they don't just get to sit here and enjoy this work, this unearned privilege, that they have work to do as well. Now, what I think people confuse is that they think that means self-hatred, and it doesn't. That does not mean self-hatred. I want them to.
Or I think, you started by saying you think that they have unearned privileges that you don't want them to lose. You just want them to be universal. I think that what other people hear, though, is, listen, it's all of our, goal to make sure that our kids are advantaged over others, not just advantaged over others. And what they hear in the not so subtle part of this white on white crime that you guys are having in your discussions is that some of you are saying, for the world to be fair, we have to interrogate the unearned privileges that we've had, and we've got to make the world right. And what the other of you are saying, this is like the Crips and the Bloods of white people. What the other side is saying, to hell with that. It took us centuries to build up this privilege. The country is browning, and you're a race trader. You want to give away our goods and our assets. Our kids deserve what they have because we worked for years for it, to order the world this way. And we're not for this mea culpa stuff. We're not for this kind of like, listen, when I put my kid in kindergarten, my job is to make that kid a star in the world and in world history, and you're trying to pull back on that. That's the savage reality of this white on white conversation y'all are having.
So, and I think there are two things in my mind right now. One is this idea of, like, if I have a pizza pie, right, and 3/4 of it is mine, and someone's like, no, I just want my half, and I'm like, no, that's not fair. No, you like that. And there's that phrase, right? Equity to the privileged feels like oppression, right? It's going to feel like oppression, but it's not. It's not like I'm giving away more than my share. I'm just giving away the stuff that I don't need. Like, why are they so easy to make afraid? Well, manipulation is powerful, and I think when you talk about people's children, people get afraid. Now, the thing is that kind of blows my mind a little bit. And I really do think this comes from my Eastern European Jewish heritage, is that, like, every Passover, when we sit down for the Seder, we talk about how we know what it is to be slaves in the land of Egypt. Therefore, whenever there is injustice, we need to heed the call. Now, We don't all live up to that. I don't live up to that all the time, but I take that as a really firm bedrock of my existence.
Yeah.
That is why I am here, that I cannot be silent. It's really hard to do. But the thing is, I cannot be silent and still be comfy. Like I can still enjoy life and go on vacation and have my kids go to school and do all that stuff and still fight for justice, right? This is not I'm not falling on my sword here. I'm quite comfortable.
Yeah, and that's probably, you have the comfort. So this is probably why you can be liberal about your theory on these things. Let's just let's play, I'm not going to say devil's advocate. I'm going to say the not God advocate, because I don't ever want to play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. But if I were playing the not God advocate role here, I would say the racist white people are more realistic than the non-racist people are. And they're more realistic in this one way. They know the dirt that they've done over years and years and years. And they know the hostilities that they've created in people globally and locally. And the corner that they've painted themselves in is that there's no turning back. You can't turn back what they did. So the idea that they would ever want to be in a world where someone else was in power now and think that it could be done fairly and be okay with it is out of the realm of possibility for them. If Black people suddenly took over the United States at every level of government to the extent that white people run it now, if brown people did, if people of color suddenly had all of the state houses, all of the governorship, all of Congress damn near, and the presidency, and all of corporate America, and all of the banking system, and all of everything, what I think white racists are really realistic about is they suddenly would have to be different kinds of people, and they would have to accept shit that they don't have to accept right now in life. They probably, and this is why they are fighting right now becoming a minority. And this is why in my mind, why you're seeing all this kind of agitation is because the slightest hint that they are becoming that second-class citizen that they made everybody else is enough to make all of white power in the whole world freak out. They want to throw everything at it. Their police, the military, the law, their governors, their senators, their money. They want to cut, like shit they used to believe in, like freedom of speech and corporations can do whatever they want and all that. They want to go after Twitter for deplatforming the former Klansman in chief. They actually want to go back on things like we don't want your corporate money anymore if you're going to support Black Lives Matter. They are serious now. And they are serious because becoming a minority is probably the most scary of all scary movies. Take The Exorcist and The Omen and Friday the 13th and all of it, and its scary factor if you put them all together, and that's not even close to as scary as becoming a minority for racist white America. And non-racist white America, I don't know how you're going to convince your other half of the team there. Well, we might have to try it.
well, I do think there is something horribly refreshing about the honesty of a bigot. Right? There is something there because there is something so exasperating and dangerous about the half-truths of a so-called colorblind white person, right? I mean, I don't think convincing has to happen necessarily because it's gonna happen, right? Like there is going to be a D or a less whitening of America, and they're gonna have to deal. And I think this is really where the Republican Party has killed themselves, is that like they chose a losing side in the long game. They chose
a Democrat. Don't know that though, Zach.
I don't know.
You're like a teacher of literature, and you're a Jew.
I am a Jew. That's true.
As a Jew with the Jewish story, and as I have studied it, and I'm not a scholar on this, but I have been fascinated since my teen years of how you could convince Germany to go from 1930 something to 1945, right? Like as a teenager, I was always amazed when we had those lessons about like how that could happen in a regular country, like how you could go from this to that. And I'm still fascinated with it because we're starting to see echoes of some of the same strategies, right? Strategies with the media and communications and stoking grievance and creating scapegoats and tying it to economics and creating ghettos. All of this stuff seems to be like we haven't eradicated that. It seems like America's is so anyways, I guess I'm long-winded on the idea that a final solution is out of the question. When you start seeing the fervor that they have about abortion because they want all babies to be born, because they don't, when you have a person like Steve Scalise say you can't build a civilization with someone else's baby, when you start looking at their immigration stuff and we can't have people coming here from shithole countries, and the only reason Democrats want them here is because they want to, you know, brown up everything and create the next America, and we're not going to let it happen. We have Tucker Carlson on a major news program talking about the replacement theory, talking about we will not be replaced, and proffering the anti-Semitic racist replacement theory on national television, right? Go back 10 years and tell yourself that that would be possible, that a national mainstream program would do what David Duke would have loved to have done 20 years ago, which is get a mainstream television telegenic host to be proffering anti-Semitic and racist theories as if it's just kind of just normal, like just talking about it. When you have people who march in a city and say Jews will not replace us, and you have a president who says, well, you know, I see both sides, right? You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's when you have people who pass laws like in Oklahoma saying that if you hit somebody with your car at a protest, you'll be let off. Like it's okay now to literally drive your car through a protest and kill people like they did in Charlottesville. They passed a law that says that.
Right.
These aren't good signs, man. When I put all these things together, this is bad.
No, they're not. They're not. I think about this in a couple of different ways. One is there is a part of the Jewish heritage of whether it's right or wrong, of like that this too shall pass, right? So there is that like 5,000 year long worldview of like you persist, you continue, you do that, right? So there is that part of it. The other part of it is, and where my work comes in, is talking to the people who have the Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns but don't do shit. That is who I talk to. That's who I talk to. The racist ass uncle who says something at Thanksgiving, that's who I talk to in front of everybody, in front of all the children, right? That's the work in my microsphere I can handle. I can't handle Oklahoma. I've never even been there, right? So I can't do any of that stuff. What I can try to do is maximize my voice in the way I can. I also really think it's important, and I started to do this, is call the people out who were on quote unquote the right side and now are not. I think it's important to do that. I think it's important to do that because you can't just let them like, oh, I guess they're on Tucker Carlson's side now. It's like, all right, no, that's a problem because you sold out now. You actually have shown who you are, right? You are, and that is.
You know, I just want to stop on that point too, Zach, because I'm not going to name names, but you know, through Education Post and through Brightbeam, I support a lot of voices across the spectrum because I think there's a lot of different ways for people to fight for justice. Every now and then, someone will surprise me with how far they go off topic or off territory. Sometimes you go so far off topic that you even literally end up on Tucker Carlson talking about illiberal things that betrays all of the allyship that people thought you had with them. prior to that day. And I'm only pointing that out to say, as minorities, as ghettoized and second-class people, and otherized people, and looking at the Jewish story, like you mentioned, that this too shall pass. There's also a thing about never forget. And there's the thing about never forget is you better learn that there are signs that the bad thing, the big bad can happen. The big bad thing can happen. And one of the things I think about with my allies, my so-called allies, my co-conspirators, is which one of you would hide us in the basement if something went really bad? And maybe sometimes we're wrong about that. Maybe we're wrong about the persons that we think would, because when your ass shows up on Tucker Carlson saying the opposite of what I thought you were about for all the years that I've known you, it does make me rethink kind of like who in a final solution scenario would really have our back.
Yeah, and I think one, it's impossible to know. I think it's also impossible for a person to actually know themselves, because not for nothing, like in 1930, right, Hitler comes to power in 33. In 1930, I don't think if you ask a random German person, like, would you go along with it? They'd probably say no, right? Yeah, but then you find yourself in it. What I will say this, I'll hide your family if you hide mine, right? Like that I can name. There is a suspension of belief where I don't think that will happen. And there's also the part of me that says you need to have a place to go. You need to have a place to go. Now, for me, that's probably Brooklyn, right? That's where I'm going to go back to. But to me,
I mean, do you think though, and you know, this, I don't want to keep harping on the Jewish story, but it's one of the historic plot points that is rich with all the lessons that you need to learn about this particular issue we're talking about right now. Like we could study other periods of time. We could start at slavery, like all of the science that was created to convince people that blacks were second-class citizens or whatnot. But really the modern, more likely scenario that we can study is 1943 to 45 and beyond, right? Because it was fast, quick, efficient. It happened in an entire nation. It used all the apparatuses. It used art and music and propaganda and media personalities. And if you look at the people who were in the final solution camp, they were artists and movie stars and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Here we are in the United States. We've got people like John Voight and, you know, and other actors, Ricky Schroeder, you know, popping up, blah, blah, blah. We have an entire news station that's 24/7 that is pumping people with scapegoat stories. The immigrants are coming to take your money, your jobs, and your women. The blacks are tearing up your cities and tearing up everything. The liberals, the gays, like, you know, man, it's too much of an echo not to pay attention.
It is. And I think one of the biggest lessons from, and there's the famous poem, right? First they came for X, but I wasn't X, so I didn't speak up, right? The thing is, if you stay silent, they will come, right? They will come for you, right? If first they came for the Jews, I wasn't Jew, I didn't speak up. Then they came for the socialists, I wasn't social, I didn't speak up. Then they came for the gays, I wasn't gay, I didn't speak up. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up. So the lesson there is that even though it's not happening to you, you speak up. One, because it's the right thing to do, and two, because they could be at your door next. So when I talk about critical race theory and why it's important, that's not because I am not fighting for my side. It's because my side is our side. That's what it is. And the only and the fools who don't see that are the fools who are getting played by the people who are supposedly speaking for them. And you know, and when you look at Germany post-war and how they educate their citizens on Nazi Germany, that's wild. That's a wild story, right? Because you don't see a Joseph Goebbels high school, right? You don't see a Heinrich Himmler University, right? You don't see that. What you see is
that's a big part of the lesson too, Zach, is that they corrected the situation differently than America corrects any of its situations.
Yeah, no, we just keep moving. We just keep moving.
We keep moving.
Keep moving.
Yeah.
if you stop and you learn, and not just on a national level, but on a personal level, individual level, there is liberation there.
Yeah.
There is liberation there. Because truth is liberatory. And when you learn where you are in the system, I said this before, you can drop the pretension of perfection.
Yeah.
I am not perfect. And I have made choices for my family that perpetuate injustice. I am also trying to do right by that and trying to do work within these communities. I'm also very cognizant of this idea of so-called allies, white people flocking into communities of color to fix shit. Where it's like, no, you got issues where you're at, right? So I live in the predominantly white small town outside of Philadelphia, and one of the things I'm trying to do is try to do actual work so that we live up to our so-called progressive rhetoric, right? We are a progressive district with disciplinary disparities in our high school. Not acceptable, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is it so? Like in my small town, for every 100 white students, 2 kids are suspended. For every 100 black students, 16 are suspended. For every 100 students with disabilities, 30 are suspended, right?
Jeez.
So I can't put my sign out my lawn and then go try to work in North Philly because that's where the work is. No. I put my sign on my lawn and I do my work here because this is where the work needs to be done. So
I love that. You know, one of the big pushbacks on you as a teacher and in the classroom teaching critical race theory, which no one is really, let's just be real, no one's teaching critical race theory in the classroom.
Correct.
Especially in young people's classrooms, because it's a college level scholarly thought system. Correct. That actually it's too involved. What people are conflating to be CRT in the classroom is just evidence of just how dumb many Americans are. Anyways, well, Bill Conrad here. So I just want to say, Bill Conrad says that he has a studio apartment. We can work it out. So he'll like hide us in his studio apartment. Cool. Bill, as survival stories go, I don't know that that's the good start of a survival story for me, but I really appreciate the sentiment, man. Hide me in your studio apartment. I appreciate that. You as a literature educator in literature, you probably had to like sit and rest and live in literature for periods of time. Is there anything in any of it that's informed your thinking and your thoughts about the dangers of blind nationalism and how it plays out in this situation?
In literature?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking like some of the stuff I read in high school felt like it subversively was saying that blind nationalism would become a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I got that learning at home. That's where I got that learning, right? I got that learning from home. I have my grandfather's passport with the Nazi stamp in it, right? So I got that work at home. There are a couple of stories that jump out to me that were unbelievable to teach and to read and to learn. One is a short story by Ray Bradbury called The Other Foot. And it's dated, right? It's in the 50s and 60s. It's dated. But essentially, the plot of it is that in the 50s, Black people in America were like, you know what? We're out. And they got on the rocket and they went to Mars. And they lived. And 50 years later, after the nuclear holocaust, white people came. And the whole story is of the Black community on Mars saying, what do we do? Do we lynch them up? What do we do? And it's fascinating.
What's the name of the story?
The Other Foot.
I have never heard of this story. I mean, I love Ray Bradbury. A Wrinkle in Time is amazing. The Other Foot.
The Other Foot.
And it's literally Black people?
Yeah. It's
wow.
Yeah. And it's written a while ago. So a lot of it's dated and all that. Yeah. But it's an interesting idea. And the culminating scene, I won't give it away, but the rocket lands and people are there with ropes and guns, and they are ready, and I'll let you know how it ends. There's another story that I have been trying to remember the title of, and I can't, or the author, but essentially it's a small town in South America, in southern United States. Sorry, and similar idea. All the Black people leave out, and at first, the white people are like, yeah. And then it occurs to them that they're now the bottom rung on the ladder. And they start begging them to stay. And those stories have meant a lot to me. But anything by Toni Morrison has always blown me away in terms of teaching. The Street by Ann Petrie is often overlooked Harlem Renaissance text. If it's, I think of it as the female native son. It's like the female Bigger Thomas. Ludi Johnson is the character. So lots of things there.
It feels like to some extent, Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
1984, Orwell. I don't know if you remember a story called The Lottery.
Yeah.
You know, The Lottery. That is a savage. That story still haunts me to this day. But I feel like we're living in a version of The Lottery.
My students always love Brave New World as well.
Really?
Yeah. Once you get past the first 2 chapters, which are just sciencey and insane,
yeah,
we really like the idea of caste, like strictly defined caste that is kept numb by drugs, by soma. They really are into that idea. And one thing that really jumped out to them is that there was an experiment within the book where all the alphas, right, the top caste, are put on an island just to see what would happen. And the whole thing fell apart because no top caste person was going to take out the garbage. Like, it didn't work. And my students loved that idea because they were like, so why are we all going to college then? Right? Why are we buying this line that this is what success is? What I love about teaching literature, and I never taught history, although of course they all intertwined, is that literature doesn't provide the answer, it provides the question. And that, I think, is what really I dig about teaching literature, is that I'm not here to teach you the answer. That's boring. And also that's full of hubris because I don't know the answer either. What I do know is how to ask a question. And that is real power. And kids really dig that because for their whole educational life, they've been told wrong answer. But if they are told right question, then they're like, oh, I always thought questions meant I didn't understand. But if questions mean I do understand, I can do this. And that actually leads to really extraordinary learning.
When you teach something like Brave New World and you haven't had any encounter with CRT, it's not something that's in your head, you don't know about, and then you have learned about CRT and it's something you adopt or you really think deeply about, what's the difference in your lesson plans on something like Brave New World?
Well, I think what would change is your connection to the world as it is. I think what you might, if you didn't know about CRT and you only knew about, like Nazi Germany, you might teach it in the past tense. You might teach Brave New World in terms of like, so here's what they were writing about because of all the stuff that was happening then, and you would keep it past tense, which is what American education does all the time, right? They keep everything past tense, including civil rights era. And I think the way we teach that is like, see, as soon as Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, we checked that box and we moved on, right? So, but if you know CRT, and beyond that, if you are just an aware human being, you can realize that I'm going to teach Brave New World in the present tense. Right? And I think that is where the real power is. And that's where the real subversion is, right? It's not teaching these things as history. It's teaching these things as reflections of the present.
It's not that you're like looking at that same story though and saying who has the power, are males dominating women, are people of color being oppressed. It's not putting the oppression lens on that same book.
Well, it might, but I'm not going to tell the students who are the epsilons now. Right? I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to say, all right, I might have a thing now. So it's like, all right, so in Brave New World, alphas, betas, gammas, epsilons are X. What about in this school? What about in this city? What about in this country? And apply the lessons in kind of like an ever expanding matrix. And to see what my students come up with, right? Because they might say like, well, in this school, the alphas are the athletes, right? And the epsilons are the kids who love anime, right? And they might go through this whole thing. I think that's how I would teach it at post CRT.
Yeah.
Although, honestly, I would teach that book and I did teach that book that way, honestly, from my own personal heritage of like, where is the injustice here? Find it now, because it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If Jasmine Lane, who you probably know from Twitter, was here, she would be right there with you talking about these great pieces of literature, to which I would say to both of you, you could teach all of this through the movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
Everything could be taught through the movie of The Matrix. And I can name several other movies that you could. And I'm only half laughing because as a child of the 70s, I remember in this life, and I've become very sensitive to how race shows up in the materials that our kids consume. And it's why I have like a little bit of resistance to the so-called the canon, for one, as a way of thinking. Because when I grew up, I watched whole ass movies without a single black character in them. I watched whole blockbusters that if they did have a person of color in them, it was always the running joke that you always knew for sure that it was a second class role in somewhere, either a butler or, in case of Star Wars, it took you a long time before you got Billy D. Williams in the Star Wars universe, right? And there was no bigger zeitgeist than Star Wars ever. So the idea that you go back and you think that George Lucas, a man who's now married to a black woman, did a whole ass universe with no black people in it. And that was his vision of the future, right? Like, if
George
you did
Lucas
see
is married to a black woman?
Yeah, he's married to a very wealthy black woman. Both of them are very wealthy, and she's an amazing philanthropist and supporter of education. Melody Hobson, she's an amazing executive. She's a financial person, just super sharp, amazing person and whatnot. And they do a lot of philanthropy now, but I mean, the billions that they made off of Star Wars, literally, millions of children of color through the 70s watched the biggest zeitgeist in social cultural movie history not include people of color, for instance. But that wasn't uncommon. You could watch entire episodes of Charlie's Angels and Starsky and Hutch, and if you did see a black person, they were either a pimp or a hoe or something like that. They were never the hero or the first class guy. I have some classic magazines from the 70s that I collect. And you can go through an entire magazine and not see a person of color. A People magazine, I can show you your People magazine where you didn't see a single black person, right? Which is why we had Ebony and Jet and other things. And if you think in terms of critical race theory, we made progress in some ways by even not naming it critical race theory, but critical inquiry into why doesn't Revlon make makeup for black women? Why doesn't Band-Aid Corporation make Band-Aids for kids that aren't white? Why does the crayon box not have a realistic color for non-white children? So when they color people, they have a realistic color. Those were critical inquiry things where people over time lobbied and inquired on the basis that these bigger, larger systems were white normed and they were doing damage to people of color. That to me is the same conversation today. That is what we are talking about, is that have you done the work to kind of really examine the way our systems default to white and how that is harmful for non-white people? And we have a national debate that includes people who are saying it should stay that way. We like Uncle Ben. We like Aunt Jemima. We want Aunt Jemima to stay her ass on that damn syrup bottle. We want the Native American woman on the Land O'Lakes butter. We want her ass to stay right there on the butter that we sell.
And the thing is, I'm actually hearing some of my neighbors, right, when I have these conversations with them. And the thing is, and I've been asked by some like white people who are like, so what do we do in these moments, right? And very often what I say is like, so when you hear the things like the list you just read off, you might feel, speaking to a white person, you might feel the urge to respond. Just listen. Just listen. Because if you're just waiting to speak, you're not listening. Someone else say is like, just shut up and listen. And that enough might get you to realize that maybe what they're saying is true.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're just waiting to respond, yeah, but just stop talking and listen, and you might learn something. And I wrote this in the piece. It's like, and I felt this way too. I wrote that in the piece how early in my teaching career, sitting through these PD sessions, right, and feeling like, I think I called it aggressively disengaged, right? Like, and the idea is like that you're going to go through that, like as a white person, right? And the idea of like the good bad binary is a powerful thing, but if you just listen, you might learn something. You might realize that your center of the universe is not the center of the universe, and that requires you shutting up a little bit. That's not you being silenced. That's you having the humility to realize that maybe your voice doesn't need to be the center right now or all the time. And that maybe there is a point of view, another experience that's not your own, that might be valid. And so there's that space of like, you just need to sit and listen.
I think you just, like, I appreciate that. I think you just named our biggest kind of devil in the details in this discussion is people's self-centeredness is going to be hard to overcome, especially people who've been told that they're on, they're the first people of the world and they're the first world. It's going to be hard to tell them that that they're not the center of the universe. I don't know how you do that, but sometimes, I mean, maturity is about like possessing empathy, not agreement. Like we don't have to agree. Empathy is so much more powerful than agreement, right? Like you can talk to me about what's going on in Tibet, and I don't need to be Tibetan to feel like, wow, that's messed up, right? I use this example a lot. When the Beastie Boys wanted to educate the world about what was going on in Tibet, that came out of left field for me. I love Beastie Boys, but where's this? I don't live in Tibet. I don't know anything about Tibetans or whatnot. But you know what? If you're a good person, you don't have to live in Tibet or have to know anything to say, wow, that sounds kind of jacked up. Maybe I should educate myself about it and hear the story, right? Just the awareness and the empathy goes a long way, right?
Hopefully we learned it in kindergarten, right? That's the idea of like caring for other people. Like that doesn't stop.
Yeah, some kindergartens, Zach. Some kindergartens are like the Lord of the Flies. Damn it! I mentioned that earlier. We learned a different lesson in some kindergartens. So. Well, listen, I appreciate you, man. Will you come back again when you have another piece that we can talk about?
Oh, I'm always. It's an honor to be here. I'm still amazed anybody wants to hear anything I have to say in the first place. So
I think yours is a powerful voice. I think it's a powerful voice for an educator, for a white educator who is challenging, who is studied, especially. I love that you teach literature because there's so many rich stories to draw from and so many rich themes to draw on that maybe we need to be a little bit more creative. We talk about these issues in terms of political commentary. Should be a little bit more creative. We should think a little bit more broadly than the way we talk about these things. It's so gutterish. It's so in the gutter. It's so just dirty and tit for tat, crossfire, and
that's ratings. That's
ratings. Yeah. So anyways, my ratings aren't very good, but my conversations are. So just so people know, I appreciate everybody who comes to listen, to watch, giving me an hour of your time for breakfast to talk about education, to hear discussions like this. Please like it, share it, have other people kind of come to it. Send me your show ideas. If you want to find Zach, you can find Zach on Twitter. I believe it's just Z Wright, at Z Wright, is it?
At ZF Wright. You'll find it because you'll find people insulting me. So that's
go on Twitter, look for anybody insulting Zach Wright, and you'll find him. ZF Wright, at ZF Wright on Twitter. You can also find him at Education Post. If you go to educationpost.org and search for Zach Wright, it'll pull up all of his posts. Post today that made me want to reach out and talk today was a post that we had here called I thought talking about race in the classroom wasn't important. I was wrong. So I'd suggest everybody go take a look at that. Appreciate you guys as always. Zach, thank you so much.